This is where I got the idea of using Pogonia to relate the teeth reciprocally. He took mandibles and painted them with shellac. Then he would stress the mandible like it would be in function, and the shellac would crack. So then he would study how the mandible would be pulled forward with the external pterygoid muscle, and it would compress it. So this is the reason why it's braced the way it is. I talked to you about that. So this is his little book. I used to get them and have all the students read one. But this is where I got my discipline then for the use of Pogonian and then PM a little bit later, 1958. Bjork had put implants. And he found that when he put an implant right in here at the protuberance menti, no apposition and no resorption occurred. In 1960, about the same time, Enloe was studying the bone surfaces, and he described a reversal line right here where I had been using all this time for reference. So I said, I rest my case. The argument is finished. Pogonian is the best way, or PM point is the best way to relate development in the lower arch because it's a part of the mandible that isn't changing. So the first thing you want to know is where Pogonian's going to be. Is it coming forward? Is it going up? Is it going downward and forward? Is it going downward and backward? Well, that's the first consideration in planning. Now, what is the next one? Where is the maxilla going to be? Because we're using Pogonian A as a reference line. Now, depending upon what you see here and what you want, you position the lower incisor. Now, based on where this goes, has a bearing on where the molar is set up. I already mentioned this arch length bit. But it is modified by the lateral expansion in the premolar area. Now, there's a few ways of expressing arch length shortages, but the point is that we measure now the amount of crowding in an arch for an arch length shortage. It's been called imbrication. You overlap the bricks so that they'll bind. Okay. So it's called imbrication. So the amount of overlap is the amount of arch length shortage. What is the overlap? 1 millimeter, 2 millimeters? 2.5. So you can do it by just adding up in your mind. And that's a good way once you're disciplined. Now another way is to take a brass wire and do a little technique of what you call a line of least squares. You average out where the line is that these teeth fall on. What would be a line representing the dimension of this arch back to the mesial of the first molars. So you lay a brass wire around there and then you cut it. Now you straighten out that brass wire and lay it on the table on a piece of paper. Now you take small dividers and you measure each tooth. The difference between the length of the brass wire and what you get with all the mesial distal diameters of the teeth represents the true arch length shortage. Now here is an adult male Caucasian. Notice here we've got a 90-degree facial axis and a 90-degree facial angle and a 60-degree facial height and a 45-degree denture height. Notice the lower incisors +1 at 130 degrees. And a straight profile with a lip that's 6 millimeters behind the E-plane. Now the female is similar, but she's 60. But ironically, her lower incisor is +1 at 130. But her lower lip is -2. Now here's a group of 30 Peruvian males with all 32 teeth in it. If you notice now, the same 90, the same 60, the same 90 in the male, 46, but the lower incisor is now 2.5 millimeters ahead at 130. and the lower lip is -3. So they're fuller. So somewhere between this and this is a nice Caucasian face, because these are Caucasian. At the same time this sample was put together, we had 30 male subjects from Brazil, all of whom had all 32 teeth. Brazilians, of course, are a mixture. There's Indians and blacks and Portuguese and Caucasians. If you go to the Brazil, if you go to Rio de Janeiro, you got all the colors of skin in the world. Tall and tan and young and lovely, the girl from Ipanema goes walking. Ipanema Beach, I've been there, I jogged along it many times. Every Sunday at the crack of dawn, guys out there beating their drums. Now if you notice here, they're different from the Peruvian. Lower incisors +2 at 133, so they're a little more upright. The mouth is fuller. Look at it. They got 4 millimeter convexity, and these are males. Now if you notice further, the face is longer. So they have a more of a retrognathic pattern. Who knows what all the genetics are that brought it to bear, but they had a shorter anterior cranial base, more like Mexicans. Now here are the American black males. Notice now that they're the same 90, but they're more prognathic at 93 and 4 millimeters convexity on a 93 facial angle. So that's bimaxillary prognathism. In addition to that, they have protrusion of the denture on a bimaxillary prognathism. So you notice now that they have the lips ahead of the E-plane, and the lips in general are thicker. They have a 50-degree denture height, look at this, and a 4.5 millimeter protrusion. Interincisal angle 120. That calls for a proversion setup for sure. All right, now look at the orientals. The facial axis is 86. Facial height is 63. Denture height is 50, like the black. See, the same 50 here and 50 here. The same 4 millimeters convexity, but they're now +5 and +2 instead of +4, and 121 interincisal angle. In other words, your oriental is the most protrusive of all of them. But the lips are not nearly as thick as the blacks. See them? Now, we have some Mexicans here. This is mostly males, three-fourths of this is males. And you find here that they're +3.6, 89, and 59, and 91. So they're in general a little bit on the brachyfacial side, but still with the protrusive denture. Now the last was the Navajo Indian. Unfortunately, we didn't have these as adults. They're 12-year-old males. But what do you see in all 4 of these samples here? Proversion. 126, 124, 120, 121. All of them down in here, in the natural, normal occlusions. Now, if we're going to put Caucasian standards on these people, we've got to flatten them out, right? So it becomes a matter of what you want. If there's a lot of crowding, and they're out there, I'm with you, I'm going to take some teeth out. I'm going to upright it because I think people are going to be happier, maybe more stable. But that's the way I'm going to do it. But if I get a chance of putting all these teeth in, and I can make it harmonious with what that total genetics is and what that culture is. When I first started going to Japan and lecturing, the first time I was there was in 1964. When I started talking about our standards here, our Caucasian standards, upright teeth and +1, but it wasn't until I went back about the 3rd time that I learned that that standard was not good for the Japanese population. He's made a little bit miscalculation in arch depth. This is a problem we also had with the computer. With normal arch depth, this should be 23 to 24 millimeters. You're 26 and a half. So if I move this up here to 23 and a half. So this would mean that I wouldn't have to move the denture nearly back as far. So if this moves forward, and your upper molar would be moved forward. Now, this would mean then that we'd have this arch depth and you wouldn't have nearly the problem. What we did in this patient was the treatment plan was to start out with upper and lower utilities. It's class 1. We had to create arch length for 4 canines that were virtually blocked out. Class 1 expansion. Now we'll see what happened in the case. Now with the expansion, as he had anticipated, if you look at your x-rays in the beginning, on the one side here, and we pushed this back and impacted the third molar. Now if I'd have been thinking, I would have taken out both of these molars right at this time. But because the crowns were already formed, you hesitate to do it. So probably I should have taken out the molars right here. 7 millimeters short here and about 3 over here. So that's a 10 millimeter arch length shorter. She had impacted upper canines. After the utilities, we put her on the T sections. So we're opening up. Now one of the reasons why I don't try to tie teeth in, it's a little hard work to put in that T series. But the idea here is to get bracket engagement. You can pinch those loops and open them up. A lot of people might have wanted to extract her. I mean, not object to it. But the mother didn't want the teeth out. Her mother had been a previous patient, and she'd worked for me for a while. So she didn't want teeth taken out in her daughter. I said, okay, we'll go for it the other way. Now, the principle then is to open up with an expanding utility. Make it maybe a little Z shape with expanding utility. Now in doing that, I jammed a third molar. So now in the course of treatment we had a third molar taken out on one side and had the second molar taken out here because the surgeon didn't think he could get to the third molar with that. We're not worried about the upper molars until later. And she's into the process of T-sections. Now, I want to show you here how we can adjust those in the mouth. Now watch me pinch. See it open up? So you can open up space with this in the mouth by just pinching with the pliers. Just light like that. Just touch it. Alright, now let's suppose also that I want to bring the tooth out. One of the things that I can do is to pinch it in this plane of space here. I'll show you what I did there. And then pinch it here. Now if you notice, I offset that to the buccal. Pinch, pinch. So it's amazing how much movement of teeth, opening up space, rotations. Now, if I want to move only one side, let's suppose now I want to erupt the tooth a little more, I go in with a pin cutter and I will grab one side and hold the other. Now with the teeth in place, holding the wire, it won't bend like this because it'll stay there. Now if you notice, I have elevated one tooth by pinching only one half the loop. So I can elevate, or if I want to bring the other one down, I can pinch this. Once these are in place, I can open, I can close, I can elevate, or in the other plane of space, I can move them to the buccal or to the lingual by just walking around in the mouth with this buccal segment. One of the things that people see at this stage, she looks protrusive. Oh my Lord, look how protrusive she is. I don't like that. I'm going to take 4 teeth out. It's like changing horses in the middle of the stream. Now you remember I I did a calculation for facial mandibular index. She's 69, a little bit of a long face.
やや長めの顔になります。
It's not bad until it gets down in the 65 range or something like that.
まあ
She
65
is 69, mean is 74. Remember the frontal mandibular index. We go ahead then and retain her.
で
The nasal cavity looks better. She had a previous little asymmetry in her nose. This was later.
あ、これがもう
This
少
is
し後
when
で
we retained her with the 4 to 4
す。です。
on the lower arch.
か
Well, I prefer that form of retention.
これ
Now here she is at 14,
え
and you notice she's not near as protrusive as she looked.
ですね
So with maturation, she's got a nice profile. The lips are not under
だ
strain.
んだん
So I think she looks very nice.
とて
See
も
that condyle is well centered now?
こん
There, and here then is the X-ray showing that third molar coming in.
っていうのが分かります。
The third molar was removed over here,
こちら
so we have to wait for this third molar to come in. And I said if we'd taken it out early.
本来
And here's her profile. I don't think she's protrusive, do you? I think she's very attractive. She's got all of her teeth. She's got this personality. She's got a springtime personality. Now, did you predict it right?
それでは
Very good. See, there's that 2 millimeters that we had. If you'll notice here, all of this. What is it I traced there?
今書きました。これは何ですか？
Let me see the front. Now, pass this around and look at it. You can't see too much in the front here.
あんまりフロンタルがよく見えない。
But if you look in the lateral,
ラテラルだったら
she's got a tremendously enlarged inferior turbinate.
と
See it there?
ものすごく大きいです。
This girl has a breathing problem. As you said, it is a borderline case, but with an 81 facial axis. I took teeth out.
で、抜歯しました。
We extracted them. I went back there to see if we have the slides. I'll have to go up and get them tonight and see show you the technique that we used in treating it. She does look a little flat to me,
ちょっとフラットです。ここが
just a tiny bit. I
ワイ
think
ンです
that we might have gotten her a little further forward, but it's not bad.
でもまあこんなにひどくあります。
She's getting space for her third molars, and so extraction may not be too bad for her.
抜歯してもこれは良かったと思っています。
She's still got the enlarged turbinate
だ
here.
から
See
ここ
it?
にあるリポーカーが残っています。
See
大きい
this
です。
big mass here?
こんなに大きいのはそうです。
She's got that famous postnasal drip. She's also got a lot of allergies.
アレルギーもたくさんあります。
Here we were in the process of treatment
今治療中です。
with her utilities in the upper.
ユーティリティが上顎に入っています。
Space closing here with the double pelvis.
ダブルデル
So if you notice, we took out lower 4s and upper 5s, just the reverse of what you had
リハ先生がおっしゃったのと逆だったんで
in her case. Here she was before.
これは前。
And here she is now at 15.
15歳になっています。
Now let's see your forecast. She had a facial mandibular index of 75. Just on her lip, you brought her upper lip down too much.
上司が下がったようです。
But congratulations. Remember I told you the other day when you extract in a case, you take the upper first you're taking out more tooth material than you are on the lower arch. Mesial-distal width of the upper second and the lower first are almost exactly the same. One of the other factors here is that she also, if you'll notice the models, that's the reason I had you pass this around. The upper laterals are very narrow. In fact, it's so narrow that we had to make a little compromise in her treatment. We left the canines just a little bit ahead so that she wouldn't have gaps here. I've had cases that had food impaction. If you take out the lower 5 and don't get the space quite closed,
間隔で5番を取ってしまってぴったりスペースを閉じないと
a very narrow contact point.
いうことが決まり
Now
ます。
I'll bring down her slides and show you the treatment on her. What was your estimate of arch length in her lower? I'll take care of that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. About 7 right.
7ミリぐらい
That's 7 millimeters of arch length shortage.
足りなかったわけです。
81 facial axis.
フェイシャルアクセスが81度ね。
Long face.
ロングフェイスになるし。
One of the problems that you have, I have another case here that I didn't get a handout. When the face grows vertically and you're expanding, you have to worry about open bites. But how would you start this case then? How would I treat it today? Maybe I didn't treat it exactly, but I'll tell you how I do it right now. I would put an upper retraction section, just like we did for the cuspid. The
上
only
顎
thing
には
is
リトラクションセクションを入れます。
put it on the first premolar
4番のところに置き
and
ま
the
す。
molar only. If I was worried about anchorage, put on a quad
けれど
helix
もクアダヒリクスを使ってもいいです。
to help rotate the molars
でこれ大臼歯の回転をさせますから。
and stabilize them. Usually, if they're rotated significantly forward and I'm going to use the molars to close the space, we would make a direct quad helix as the first move in the upper arch. Then I would put in the retraction section with the loops. The opening up of that section, 1 millimeter, yields 75 grams of force.
で
Why do I activate it so small?
じゃ
Lamina dura.
あこれは
And we don't want to move the upper molar forward any more than we have to. So I would close the space up,
ね
and I would expect the canine to start drifting backward, at least 1/3 the space.
ね少なく
Then I would bracket the canine,
ね
bypass
うん
the first premolar,
そして
tie it back to the molar so it wouldn't come back,
で
and then start retracting the upper canine,
Yeah,
which
so-
is already on its way.
これ
In the lower,
実は科学
I would band the second molar if it was available.
を使います。
Start with the second molar,
え
and I'd put a retraction section all the way up to the canine.
で3
Only those 2 teeth would be bracketed.
で
And I'd start with the retraction of the canine
で3
with a tip back on the second molar.
Yeah,
This would
okay.
initiate the distal movement of the canine,
こうやると
making sure that I control the axial inclination of the root of the lower canine,
Yeah,
making sure that I also, as I move it distally, keep it intruded.
で
Following that then, I
で
would
次にやるのは
put a double tube on the lower first molar,
だから
and I would go in with the utility
Yeah,
below
utility.
that,
ユーティリティをその下に使います。
and I would make that a custom utility with loops.
The
We
loop.
want to hold those
Mm.
while we're creating arch length and rotating those teeth.
ねあでね
At 7 millimeters,
で
I still can
The-
move the lower molar forward 3.5 millimeters.
で
Following that then,
次にやるのは
I've got the utility here and the retraction section.
ユーティリテ
I'm in the consolidation phase, and I come in with my double delta.
ィダブル
That's what you saw in this X-ray.
と
In the upper,
で上顎は
after I get the canine back,
で
and have opened up enough space to bring the lateral through,
で2
I'd
番
do the same up there. I'd make a custom
で
utility
同じユーティリティ特別に
With
使
loops.
ってループ付きのを使います
to bring the upper laterals labially and overdo it. Bring
で
them
2
out
番
excessive.
上顎の2番
Now that would get me up to my consolidation stage.
Am I correct?
Hopefully I wouldn't have class 2 or class 3 elastics to do. But if I need class 2 elastics now because there's a fear of losing more anchorage in the upper than the lower. The reason for that is that I can tip the lower incisors upright, but I have to move the roots of the upper incisors bodily,
それは
plus their bigger teeth.
で
So if I have to do that, then I will make another utility and make a buccal segment so that I can get the upper buccal segment back. And by now I'm into an ideal arch in the lower arch.
この頃にね、
Now I want to overtreat the buccal segment,
この、
torque the upper incisors. If I don't have sufficient torque, I will turn the loop upside down in the lower, in the upper,
上顎で
and make a closing helix
でクロージングヒリクスを使って、
upside down,
それを逆
so that the torque would activate the root. This is the manner that I would treat an extraction case.
でこれは
Dr. Hilgers, Jim Hilgers,
ヒルじゃん。
came to us in 1970 and wanted to work with us.
で7
And he had been with us about 6 months.
で6
And he graduated from Northwestern University.
でノースが
He came to me one day and he says, "Why don't you ever talk about extraction? You have the reputation back at Northwestern of never taking any teeth out.
でノー
And from what I see here, you got the best extraction technique that I've ever
スと
seen."
ころが実際
I said, "Yes, there's a lot of people extract.
いやだから
But if I go out on the circuit, and I've done it, talking about extraction,
でま
people pick up on it
あでそうすると
and get the idea that this is the way to do orthodontics all the time.
で
So I've focused on treatment without extraction whenever possible. I've sort of taken it for granted that people will extract because that's the status quo of orthodontics. He said, "Well, you should talk more about extraction."
でも
I said, "Okay."
でま
I'll call your attention to contact 14.
あ
Notice that the canine is in contact with the first premolar.
Okay.
Notice the good, bold width of the lower first premolar. Lower lateral, slightly labial.
で
Due to that thickness of that tooth,
こ
this
の
one isn't in contact right there.
で
But with some wear, that will come down. I could adjust that so that that tooth could fall in.
これ
You can see these are oriental teeth.
これ
They seem to be more rounded
と
and more curved on the buccal.
それから
And they have, of course, these shovel-shaped incisors.
それから
And this is the other side. Notice that the same provisions for
反対側なんですが
over-treatment here.
この治療
Notice how really big that marginal ridge is on the lingual. And there's no cuspa carabelli on it. Now you can't see it, but it's on the lingual.
でそこ
She looks like she's wearing a retainer because this is a little irritating.
と
Now another characteristic that you'll notice,
もう一つ
the amount of rotation of the molar. Here's the distal buccal cuff, these are lingual
これは
cuffs.
近親です
And if you
伸
notice,
ばしていきます
it goes through the distal half of the canine on the other side.
反対
Another characteristic that I hope you will notice
がもう一つ
is that these two cusps
ここ
are virtually horizontal with the two cusps on the other side.
反
A
対
lot of people will naturally put this tooth
こ
this
の
way,
シガをこういう形に置いてしまうんです
thinking that it belongs straight in line with the arch like this one.
でこ
If you do that, you're not going to have this cusp
そう
here
する
fitting
と
in
ここの口頭
the
が
distal fossa of the lower first bicuspid.
が
Notice that this tooth is rotated well toward the distal.
こ
Notice that just as in the Caucasian, we've intentionally overlapped this right here.
ここは
And this mesial surface here is slightly to the buccal of the canine on the distal.
それ
Adequate width through here,
で
even with a little narrowness to the mouth.
で
So I have treated plenty of the oriental
こういう
types.
形でまあ
That was her when we started.
え
So there's what we started with that patient. So that was a class 1 crossbite
一級
of the oriental variety.